Thank you, Bharti. Thank you so much. We are glad to have you here. We're glad to host everyone over here. And yes, plus point for self-care, like Niharika said. Okay, we have a pretty good turnover, and we're just waiting for just a few more participants, and then we are good to go. All right. Okay, we will begin now. We will begin. There are a few more people who are joining in still, but nevertheless, we'll begin so that we are able to have a look at the things that we want to talk about today in adequate time. All right. So it is my pleasure to welcome you all on this very pleasant Saturday evening for this webinar, which talks about dealing with difficult emotions. All right. This webinar is arranged by Humans of Safe Spaces, along with interior gardening psychological services. All right. So I would first tell you a bit about Humans of Safe Places before we move forward. Humans of Safe Places is on a mission to create safe safe places, break taboos, and create awareness about the most stigmatized issues of the society, like mental health, discrimination, racism, abuse, body shaming, and much more. Considering the entire COVID pandemic, we have become isolated and are stuck in our homes, right? So this has led to a drastic impact on our mental health, and as a result, has affected various aspects of our life. We are very much aware about these issues, and we want to support the community so that they can deal with their emotional and mental issues. We have been organizing a series of webinars during the pandemic. Our last two webinars were about therapy and toxic relationships. And today we are going to shed some light on coping with difficult emotions. The human experiences involves having the capacity to feel a wide range of emotions, but not all of them are comfortable or easy to feel. Coping with difficult emotions is just an essential life skill. We need to regulate our feelings and survive stressful situations. So, join me in this webinar to understand the what's, how's, and why's of coping with difficult emotions. We are glad to have our facilitator today, Ms. Niharica Shah. Niharika is psychologist and therapeutic arts facilitator. She holds an M.Sc in clinical psychology, and along with that, she is also certified to facilitate therapeutic art and movement. She founded her consultancy, Interior Gardening Psychological Services, in 2018. Through that, she offers a variety of mental health services aimed at creating safe spaces for individuals and groups to explore, express, and transform themselves. She is a strong advocate of the powers of vulnerability and self compassion and enthusiastically promotes self care as an essential practice of well being. Welcome to this webinar, Niharika.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's lovely to be with Humans of Safe Places again.
Yeah, it's a really privilege of us to have you over here. So as we have talked a little bit about difficult emotions, like as we have already talked about the webinar series and our organizers and our facilitator. Maybe Niharika, would you tell us how this topic is relevant to us right now?
Sure. So I think you quite rightly put across that the pandemic has caused us to isolate in many different ways. And I think what happened in that isolation is that we were forced to confront certain difficult feelings that maybe we had chances to distract ourselves from or avoid when we were in our otherwise everyday pre-pandemic lives. It's also made it a lot harder in this isolation to ignore these feelings. We've had to deal with many different instances of surviving stressful situations. And I think that would mean different things to different people. But one thing I have seen in common through my work, through interacting with friends, family, and through my own journey is that the pandemic has brought to light that as humans, we do have a bunch of difficult feelings that we have to deal with. And it can get quite messy, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So I think that is why, like, when you approached me, this was one of the first things that came to mind. Again, as like you said, coping is an essential life skill. I definitely believe that. I think we need to have these skills to deal with feelings which we aren't taught in school. Social emotional learning is something that is very selectively offered in various programs. And for the most of us, this was not something, including me, like this was not something that we grew up learning about. I didn't grow up learning to name my feelings, and I doubt that most of you did either.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, since it is something that is unfamiliar and so essential, I thought it would be a good idea to touch upon this topic because emotions and emotional experiences is one thing that connects us all as humans.
Right, right, right. As you rightly said, emotions and emotional experiences are something that connects us all as humans. And I completely agree with you when you say that this is something that is essential, but it sadly happens to be one of the things that we have not thought about.
And I
It's pretty
think
sad.
apart from even just taught about, it's not something that is even modeled to us a lot, whether it's by
Yes.
our family, whether it's by our teachers, the people that we look up to. Feelings is such a sort of taboo, like nahi hona chahiye kind of subject that nobody really wants to talk about it.
Correct, correct, correct. So I noticed, Niharika, that you mentioned the word coping, right? So would you like to tell us what does it really mean to cope? And along with that, how is coping different from self care, or are they
Sure.
the same thing?
Right. Okay. So, also, just before like we go further, I want to just put a few things across to the audience. I'd love for this to be interactive, so feel free to be texting in the chat as and when thoughts come up. We do have like we're going to put aside time after each sort of topic that we're covering for Q&A, so that we don't have like a whole bunch of questions and answers only at the end. So definitely, I would encourage you to interact with us in the chat if you're watching on YouTube in the comments. And at any point, if you feel like I'm either going too fast or I'm talking too much psychological jargon, please feel free to let me know. Yeah, that would be really helpful for me. So, yes, coping. I have a few slides that I'd like to share. Would you be able to do that, or shall I do that?
You can do that.
I think you'll have to. Oh, I do have access. All right, give me 1 second. Oops, there we go. Do you see the slide?
It's loading.
Okay. Does
I'll
everybody else
start
see the
to
slide?
start seeing it in a bit. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great. All right.
Yes, we do.
So, just for everybody to get like a general idea of the definition, quote unquote, of coping. So, it refers to our human behavioral process for dealing with demands, which are internal demands or external demands, specifically in situations that are perceived as threats. I want to break this down a little bit. An internal demand is what we would be talking about most today. We are talking about dealing with difficult emotions, which is mainly an internal process. An external demand would be something like you already have a list of things to do, and someone comes and says, do all of these things as well. That is an external demand. And that would be how we might cope with stressful situations as opposed to feelings. So I just also want to make that distinction, because we do have to cope as humans with both of these things, feelings and situations, and there may be different ways in which we choose to do that. But like, to sort of break it down, like, coping, in my opinion, isn't about getting rid of like feelings or stopping yourself from having certain thoughts. I think it's about how we choose to respond to these feelings. And that seems to be the crux of whether we cope well or we don't cope well, not just in the present, but also in terms of our future selves. Um, and the purpose of coping strategies, which would be like the actions that we take, in like passive or active actions that we take to cope, would be like to regulate the body's nervous system, to soothe ourselves, minimize the pain we're feeling, because difficult emotions do bring up pain in different forms. I think we do touch upon pain points when we're confronted with certain difficult emotions. Releasing just pent up emotions and energy, managing crisis situations. If you're having some kind of mental health emergency, coping strategies would be things that are really essential to know of then. Also, to compartmentalize emotions, we don't always have the space in our everyday lives to be feeling so many feelings. Like, it can get a lot. And as a therapist, I think I can say that definitely, like, we need to have the capacity to also be like, okay, I recognize that these feelings are coming up, but I'm going to put time aside later on to acknowledge and deal with them. Because right now, there are other demands that I have to keep up with. Also, creating connections in ways that are familiar to us. This for me was really interesting when I was learning about coping, that this is how we tend to also cope. And this may or may not be necessarily healthy. But say, like, if the need that is coming up is for feeling safe, feeling secure, feeling loved, and that need is not being fulfilled, and that's bringing up certain difficult emotions, such as maybe loneliness, it's bringing up feelings of rejection, we may try to connect with the person that we are experiencing this feeling towards in ways that are familiar. So whether that means messaging them a whole bunch, saying like, hey, please talk to me, whether that means completely cutting off and isolating because that need was not fulfilled, so I don't want to be around you. All of these are ways in which we're actually coping, whether or not we recognize it. And the fact that all of you are here today, like we're all sitting here, means that you have coped with whatever situations or feelings that have come your way. And, like, I don't think the saying you've gotten through 100% of your worst days is any truer now as before 2020. It was a year that was particularly difficult for us as a collective, and we've made it through. And we're here today. And I think we all deserve a real kudos for surviving these situations. And coping, a lot of times, is just about that, about surviving the stressful demands that we're experiencing internally or externally. And also, again, the last one, to feel a sense of control, safety, security. Like, these are very important needs that we have as human beings. And when these needs are generated with and not being fulfilled, we may cope with the feelings by acting in certain ways that would help us fulfill those feelings. What you said earlier also about self-care and coping, I think I see them both as very, very different things. Of course, in terms of strategy, there may be overlaps with coping and self-care, but the way that I understand it, self-care is about practices, like regular practices that support you. Whereas I would say that when we're thinking about coping, it's about in the moment. How do I support myself? How do I manage this feeling so that I'm not completely overwhelmed and I can still continue to function?
Right, right, right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It does make sense, and it also helps me distinguish between these two categories clearly.
Yeah,
Alright.
because like you
While
could,
we,
Wait, but like if you
Yeah,
are,
yeah, go
say,
ahead.
dealing with like an overwhelming feeling of anger, like going for a run may be something that would help release that pent up energy or that emotion. Um, Going for a run may be something that you also take up as a self care practice, also take up as something that you do regularly, whether it's like every single day, whether it's 3 times a week, once a week, whatever your frequency of comfort is. So, like, the intention of what we're using the strategy for, I think that also becomes important when trying to figure out whether it's about coping in the moment or whether it's about a self care practice.
Correct, correct, correct. So basically, there could be overlap about the actions, but the intention to conduct that activity is something that sets them two different.
Yeah,
Have I
I
gotten you
think
right?
yeah, I think that's it. That's how I see those two as separate concepts.
Correct, correct, correct. Now, I want to ask you a little more about difficult emotions, but before
Okay,
that, we have a question by Ishani.
sure.
Ishani asks, how do you think one can come up with coping strategies for COVID fatigue, both mentally and otherwise? Since most people feel consistently exhausted and tired despite of having so much time at hands to connect yourselves.
That's a great question. However, I think what Ishani is talking about is something that is very much a physical experience primarily. And I think the mental emotional experience comes from what the body is first experiencing because of COVID, because we do know that COVID-19 causes significant feelings of fatigue. And while emotions
Right,
can
right.
also cause the fatigue, I think what she's asking about, or what they're asking about, is the fatigue that the body experiences first and foremost. Medically, I wouldn't be able to give you advice, although the first thing that comes to mind is to rest. And also, coping is about checking in with what resources are available to you. Um, if you're trying to go for a run when you are dealing with fatigue, that doesn't make any sense. It's definitely about like saying, what do I need right now and what can I do right now, as opposed to what should I be doing right now? What do I have to be doing right now? I think conscious coping tends to be more tuning in with the needs of your own body, your mind, your emotional state. So, definitely, I would recommend rest, and the fatigue that I'm hearing about COVID is definitely firstly associated with the body. So, taking care of the body and then maybe looking at how it may be helpful to look after the emotions and self connection.
Correct, correct, correct. Absolutely, absolutely. I hope that answers your question, Ishani. Um, uh, there is someone who has also asked us about emotional during COVID. It is also about the societal stigma towards COVID patients or the family of COVID patients. Absolutely, yes, definitely. Along with that, we also have one more question, Niharika.
Mhm.
Um, okay. So Hana Dasgupta is asking us how to help someone with suicidal thoughts during this pandemic.
Pranita, do you want to take up that question?
Me?
Mhm.
Okay. Uh, okay. So I think helping someone deal with suicidal thoughts during pandemic is majorly about, first of all, being with the person physically in the room so that to make sure that they are okay. But along with that, I think there are many helplines available to talk people who are having active suicidal thoughts. Along with that, I think referring them to a mental health professional who is capable of dealing with such clients would be an essential thing to do. And along with that, I think just making sure that they are going to the right professional is one thing I would recommend. Would you like to add something to that?
I think that you have covered the key parts. Like, I think finding an appropriate professional is so important, especially if somebody is struggling with suicidal thoughts. You need to have somebody who's trained with psychological first aid. And even as a caregiver or a friend, there's a lot of information available online right now. Definitely be sure to check your resources, to check your, make sure that the people that you're listening to are credible, have enough qualifications to say what they're saying. But yeah, one of the biggest things I would say in supporting somebody during the pandemic who's having these thoughts is to not shame them for having these thoughts. The pandemic is an incredibly difficult and traumatic experience, which may also bring up past experiences of trauma. And it has put us in very challenging situations, sometimes even in our own homes. So, not shaming them for having these thoughts, and also supporting them in finding the right professional. Yeah, those would be my recommendations.
Okay, right. Thank you so much, Niharika, for that. I think we'll move to our next question with respect
Sure.
to moving ahead with webinar. So we have been using the word difficult emotions and not negative emotions. So I think we would talk a little bit about that, about why particularly difficult emotions and not negative emotions, and we generally refer them to, or what makes
Right.
it harder to cope with them with them than other feelings.
Okay. So this is a mostly me thing, I think. Like, I prefer to refer to these emotions, like anger, like guilt, shame, sadness, jealousy. There's a whole variety of emotions as difficult or uncomfortable or unpleasant emotions, because I find that when we call something negative, it tends to by itself get a negative connotation, and we don't want anything to do with it. And also, just a reminder that not everything that says negative is a bad thing. I mean, I'd be really happy if I got a COVID negative result. So I think it sort of destigmatizes how we look at these feelings, which is why I feel like it's really important to call them difficult as opposed to negative. Um, Also, like an analogy that I had come up with earlier was, if we're calling, it's like the difference between an anti-hero and a villain. You're much more likely to empathize with an anti-hero than a villain. Like, you're much more likely to empathize with a Thanos than help me out here, somebody with a villain, like a classical villain.
um, Maybe Umbridge from Harry Potter.
Sure. I feel like Loki also, I see somebody's put Loki. I feel like Loki also is, yeah, anti-hero. So Joker.
Correct.
Yeah. So Loki versus
Yeah,
Joker.
Loki
Yeah.
also.
You'll get the idea. So I think it becomes easier for us to accept and acknowledge having these feelings when we don't think of them as negative. I'm wondering if the audience would like to also just list any feelings that they find hard to cope with. Anything that you have felt like when this feeling shows up, you're just like, do I have to feel you? Do you have to be here? Such an unwelcome visitor. And just any names of feelings that come to mind. Okay, I'm gonna just read out some. Wow, okay, we're getting a lot. I'm gonna read out some of them. There's guilt, anxiety, disappointment, guilt, anger, emptiness, missing someone, jealousy. Um, okay, self doubt, not feeling entirely able to accept oneself, panic, loneliness. Somebody said anxiety, OMG. It sounds like you might have forgotten about that one. Yes. Wanting to save someone else. I think what you're touching upon here is also the feeling of helplessness, if I may name it that. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. So I think we do have influctuation. I'm wondering if you could explain that a little more. I don't think I quite understand what you mean by that. Procrastination. Shame, yeah. So, just for anybody who would like to understand a little more, the difference between guilt and shame is sort of the difference between looking at action and looking at the person. Yeah. So, saying that I did something bad as opposed to I'm a bad person because XYZ thing happened. Um, Saying I failed at this task as opposed to I am a failure. So when we're focusing on the action, that's when guilt comes up. When we're focusing on labels towards the self, feelings of not being enough in some ways, that would be about shame. Um, okay, all right. So I think we have an idea about the feelings that are really like uncomfortable for us to deal with. Um, Before I answer your question, Pranita, I would also like to invite the audience to name any reasons why you feel that these feelings are not easy for you to experience. What happens that makes it so difficult to have this feeling in your life?
I think someone had raised their hand.
Okay, somebody said because they're simply inconvenient. Okay. Um, Ishani, I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on what about them is inconvenient, right?
Would you mind me speaking out of turn like this?
I'm okay to do that, yeah?
Okay. I guess in a way, when you feel anxiety, well, specifically for me, it's like I was doing something in the moment and then I suddenly feel it. So it's almost like this shouldn't be living here in my head right now. I
Mm.
did not sign up for this, but yet it is. And so you brush it off or you try to find ways to deal with it in a way like, oh, just go away already. I can't. But that sort of thing is kind of inconvenient in the sense like
So,
you
so
have
it's
things to do.
yeah, so it just sort of comes out of nowhere and takes over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So very much as you said, like an uninvited guest. And I think a lot of times these difficult feelings can feel like that. Like, I didn't ask for you to be here. Why have you just showed up? Shanita, do you want to check out some of the comments?
Yes, I'm going
Okay.
to them. Some be attraction, but seems like true love. Infatuation. It eats you up and starts affecting your daily life.
Yeah, it gets in the way of you just doing everyday tasks.
Yeah, someone is saying conflict within and tiring process. I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, yeah.
That it's
Yes,
a tiring process.
it is. Okay.
There is also, yeah, it definitely takes a toll on your productivity as well, correct?
Okay. All right. So one of the biggest things I'm hearing is that I don't know how to deal with this, which is why it's such a problem, or I feel helpless when this feeling comes up. And also it's not quite clear why it's here in the first place. So you know what? Before we go any further, how about we do an exercise? Does do most of you? Does everybody have a pen and paper or some kind of drawing app on your phone or something?
Okay, we do.
Yeah. Just give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat. Okay, all right. So I'm going to take that as a majority yes. Also, lovely to see you all interacting so much. Really great to have an active participation from the audience. Okay, wait, I had other things. Oh, yeah, wait, before we go there, sorry. So, this is a feelings wheel. I think one of the things when it comes to difficult emotions or just emotions in general is that I don't feel like we have enough of a vocabulary. Do you? Like, do you feel, Pranita, any of the audience, do you feel like we knew all of these words or like are able to identify these very well?
I wouldn't. I would say not really, because
Yeah.
many a times, whenever we are not feeling well, I think we just often say that we are just feeling sad and nothing
Yeah.
beyond that.
Yeah. And I think it also like becomes very much of, oh, I'm feeling fine, or I'm feeling good, or like I'm not feeling so good. And then I don't feel like we're always able to go further into what exactly that feeling is, into naming that feeling. And whenever we're dealing with anything about feelings, I think it's crucial to be able to find exactly what is going on. And sometimes the word can be just weird, and that's fine, but at least we have a word for it. I think naming the feeling opens up a lot of opportunity for us to get curious about it and try and understand it better. So, for any
Right.
of you who would like to, also feel free to take a screenshot of this. You can come back and refer to it in your own time. I think the presentation also will be emailed to all of the participants after, but just in case you want to hold on to it, you can take a screenshot. So from these, like these would be the most core feelings that we have, and they all branch off into a number of different kinds of, or like different degrees of feelings from there. So I think the happy spectrum is usually what we are more comfortable with. Although I would argue that sometimes we get so comfortable with all of these, they become so familiar that happy becomes a bit of a worrisome feeling. When we get happy, we're like, oh, is this going to go away now? And that's a concept called foreboding joy, which right now we don't need to get into. But yeah, just so you all have an idea of the range of feelings that we can experience as human beings. Um, I'm just going to take a second to have a look at the comments before we go into the activity. I hear somebody saying that even if we know the words, it's difficult to differentiate. Absolutely, I agree with you. Sometimes, like it's hard to pinpoint exactly what is going on, and I think that that is a practice we can take up in our own like personal processes, in our own self journeys, to get to a better understanding of what our own feelings are and how we can distinguish them for ourselves. To suppress our feelings and emotions. Yes, absolutely. Okay, all right. So, what I'm going to invite you to do for this exercise, are we doing this exercise now? Yes, let's map it out. So, I'm going to invite you to draw a little stick figure at the center of your page. I'm just going to draw one here myself. And then divide the page up into like 3 sections, however you want them. So, I've chosen to do it like this. And so name
Okay.
each of the sections. So like put one section for thoughts, one section for like bodily sensations or like just bodily experiences, and one for actions or responses.
Right.
So for all of you,
Also, while yes, so while people are doing that, I would also like to remind everyone who are watching with us on Zoom and live with us on YouTube. Feel free to share your thoughts and your doubts and your questions in the chat box with us, and we'll surely take them. And you can continue, Nihal.
thanks. So I'm going to go back to the feeling words. And I'm just going to ask you to pick out maybe one feeling that you have experienced fairly recently that was not comfortable to deal with, or like something that you do experience from fairly frequently. Just going to remind you, since this is a webinar and not a therapeutic space, uh, don't pick an experience or a feeling that would leave you feeling very overwhelmed. Check in with your own capacity of what feels comfortable for the purpose of this webinar. And then we can get to the exercise.
I think people have some questions regarding the
Yes, I'm
exercise. What do
just
we write?
looking.
Thoughts,
Yes.
sensations, and
Going back to the other page. There we go. So thoughts, bodily experience or bodily sensations, and actions or responses. So this is how I've got mine down.
correct.
Okay. So do you all have your one feeling picked out? Okay. I'm going to take that as a yes, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you what to do. So think back to a time where you have experienced this emotion that you have picked out. And I'm going to invite you to write down when you were feeling that feeling that is unpleasant or is hard to hold. What were the thoughts that were going through your mind? What were like the thought statements? So, for example, if the feeling was, say, worry, um, what were the thoughts going through your mind? Was there like, oh, what is going to happen about this? How am I going to deal with this? Like these would be thought statements. Yeah. What was happening in your body? Were you feeling very lethargic when you were experiencing this emotion? Were you feeling like there was a lot of restlessness? Were you like, did it have any impact on your sleep, your appetite, any kind of experience that was related to the body? And also, like when this feeling came up, what did you do? Like, how did you respond? Did you do things differently from how you usually do? So, if you were feeling worried, did you tend to maybe spend more time scrolling through your Instagram or your Facebook or your Twitter or whatever, just to distract yourself? Did you maybe call a friend and talk about what was worrisome? Did you try to just binge watch something or go out for a run? Like, what were the ways in which you managed the feeling, or just what actions you took at that time? Does this make sense to everybody so far? All right.
It
So I'm going to
does.
give everybody like,
Yes,
take like,
guys, let us know in the comments if you have any doubts, if you have any
yes.
questions.
In case you need me to repeat the instructions, just let me know. Otherwise, take like 3-4 minutes for the moment and write down whatever you can around this. Let us know when you're done, and I will also just give you all a reminder soon. Okay, I see that some people are already done. Great. Just going to give like 2 more minutes for anybody who's still working on this. Also, just on a side note, like, I think when we're looking at difficult feelings, the way that I see them is on sort of random, on two sides of a scale. One would be like a high energy kind of uncomfortable feeling, and one would be like a low energy kind of uncomfortable feeling. So I think our body responses, the nervous system also processes these feelings in different ways. Like anger, anxiety would be like high energy feelings where there is excitement in the body. And sadness might be a much more low energy feeling. We don't see ourselves jumping around or like sort of pacing when you're feeling sad. It usually involves a lot less movement. Okay. Is everybody sort of done-ish? Yeah? I see a lot of people who have completed. Okay. All right. Great. So just also want to check in. How is it for you to like get curious about your feeling? Get curious about what's happening inside of you when this feeling comes up, whichever one you chose. I think like I'm also okay to have people unmute and like say a few lines real quick. Just maybe raise your hand and let us know.
I think there is someone who had raised their hand. Um, are you also checking comments, Niharica?
I am, yes. I see Reena has said, I was very confused while choosing because more than one thing was there. Yeah, I think the purpose of this is just for us to get comfortable with like looking into our feelings. But yeah, we can, of course, generalize this and use it to get an understanding of different kinds of feelings. Okay.
Muskan, we will let you know about that soon. Ishani had said it felt rational, I guess, to see a reason in a way. Yeah, correct. And yes, like Ishani has correctly mentioned, I think it is about exposing yourself as well. Do you agree with that, Niharika?
Um, yeah, I think this exercise can help sort of just see things also from a little more cognitive space, which becomes harder to access when we're feeling very emotional. I do see
Mm-hmm.
some comments that this has been a little bit, it has this exercise churning up things. So I'm wondering if we can all just take a second here and bring focus to the soles of our feet. Just we can try out coping while we are talking about coping. So just gently bring your awareness to the soles of your feet. However,
Okay.
you're sitting, wherever you are, just notice how the floor, the cushion, whatever you're sitting on is feeling against the soles of your feet, what that texture is like. Is there a temperature? Maybe just take a few breaths here. And if you feel the need to, then maybe take some deep breaths. And what we're trying to do here is sort of regulate the nervous system, which plays a really integral role when we're talking about emotions, and which coping is also an important like way to do that. Yes, Headspace. I personally haven't tried the app, but I have heard that it has a lot of these grounding strategies, which is what we were trying right now. Grounding is something that we do by bringing focus to either our senses, our sensory input, to our body, or to the environment. All right. Just gonna, yeah. So I'm going to also invite you to try out this with whatever feeling that you're sitting with right now. Um, Saying to yourself, either out loud or in your mind, a part of me feels, and fill in with your personal experience right now. The idea for this statement is sort of to allow us to acknowledge the feeling, but also create a little bit of distance from the feeling, especially when difficult feelings become really big. They're taking up a lot of space within us. I think a challenge is to be able to step away from them. And that can be a really important practice. And this statement can be really helpful in helping us achieve that space, to be able to see the emotion as opposed to be overwhelmed by the emotion. So even if we're saying that a part of me feels overwhelmed right now, we're acknowledging the feeling, but we're not becoming the feeling. We're not sort of identifying so much with the feeling that the feeling is all that there is left of us. Because at the end of the day, this is a feeling. And it's going to pass. As cliched as it sounds, it is a visitor. Some feelings stay around for longer than others. But I think all feelings are important. The way I sort of see coping is that, let's say this glass of water is a feeling. Yeah. We have, say, there's some grief coming up, because of a loss that we may have experienced, which I think a lot of us have during the pandemic. And this is going to be there. Seems like there was some interruption. So we have this entire feeling, the pace at which we want to. I'm wondering if the host could maybe mute participants. That was nice to hear some laughter. Okay.
Niharika,
Yes.
before
Sorry.
we move ahead, there was
Yeah.
a question about the wheel, the feeling wheel, and
Yeah.
someone was not. So it's a question from YouTube. Someone was not getting. Someone was not understanding the chart. So would you like to just quickly shed some light on that
Sure.
before
Could
we
you
go ahead, and
ask
then
me the
we'll come
question?
to a few more questions.
Sure. Could you ask me the question that was in the chat, because I can't seem to find it.
Okay, okay. So basically the question is that how do we read the chat? So what you talked about, the happy being the spectrum and other emotions coming along with that, would you like to repeat it?
Sure. I think it's a fairly simple chart. I don't think there's a formula to go about it. It might be
Okay.
helpful for us to sort of start with the center and be like, okay, since these are the six sort of core feelings that we all experience. So what is happening? Like, am I feeling surprised, happy? Like, to start from identifying that spectrum of emotion that we might be experiencing, and then going into within this feeling, what is the nitty gritty? Like, what is the other parts of me feeling different, in the fearful section or in the bad section? Other parts of me feeling different things within that itself? Is there one part of me that's feeling sort of pressured, but there's another part of me that's feeling completely indifferent to what is going on? So yeah, like it doesn't have to be very complicated, just to sort of follow through and give you an idea of where the feeling also can be placed, what it's a part of in the larger spectrum. I hope that answers the question.
It does, it does. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much. Would you like to go ahead with what you were explaining, or would you like to take a few more questions?
I think I'd like to go ahead. Where
Okay.
I wanted to sort of also bring in that feelings aren't a bad thing. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not a bad thing for you to be feeling feelings, and all feelings, I feel, do have a purpose. Over here, I've sort of curated a list of some of the difficult feelings that we do experience. And I'd like to bring your awareness to the message aspect of it. And I think that really helps us understand more and get maybe a faster insight into what this feeling is bringing our awareness to. When we experience grief, I think the feeling is about, I cared about something or I loved something, and that is lost now. When we're feeling anger, often we're looking at, has a boundary been crossed? So whether we look at personal anger, whether we look at like collective anger, a lot of times it's about feeling violated in some way. If I'm getting suddenly really angry with someone, with someone asking me the same question again and again, or telling me to do the same thing again and again, it may seem like, why are they doing this? There may be irritation that comes up, but maybe there is a boundary that we're not entirely aware of that we're actually having, which has been sort of crossed. Um, yeah, I'm wondering if anybody can sort of, in the audience, could give an idea of a boundary that your anger has made you aware of that has crossed. Or like Pranita, like if you also can't have anything in mind, like when you experienced anger last, if you could name a boundary that felt like it had been crossed.
Boundary. So when you say that the boundary has been crossed, is it about someone else crossing your boundary, or
Yes,
how is it?
that's a really interesting question. I think because we often get angry at ourselves also for crossing our own boundaries, for violating our own boundaries, and we do that. I think we do that unconsciously or consciously. We cross our own boundaries, whether it's in terms of time, whether it's in terms of social etiquette also. I see somebody saying personal attack. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we cross our own boundaries, and that anger may come up directed towards ourselves, or we may have other people cross our boundaries. So, like, for example, um, like if you're with a relative, or if you're with just in a family situation, maybe not recently, but maybe previously, and people start to ask you questions that are fairly personal, which they don't really have any business asking or knowing about, especially for any of you who are of marriageable age by Indian standards. Whenever you might have attended family occasions and we asked, oh, so when are you looking? Do you have somebody in mind? When are your parents starting to look for somebody for you? When are you getting married? Or like these questions are not necessary for them to know. And there may be anger that comes up in that time. And we may have different ways of coping with that. Um, so yeah, fear definitely is associated with safety, when our sense of safety is threatened. Now that doesn't necessarily mean like physical safety. It could also mean our emotional safety being threatened, or our sense of identity being threatened. What can I do to protect myself? Like that is the message that the fear is bringing to our awareness. Guilt, like stop doing this, make amends. I think I said their message, but their gift is the section that is more key here. Just gonna have a look at the chat, the comments as well. Okay, all right. How is everybody doing with the information that I've offered so far? I see that people have said the chat was helpful.
I think it's really helpful.
Okay.
I think we're learning something about ourselves.
That's always great.
Um,
There's a question here about grieving having to do with anger as well. So, if you do look at the cycle of grief, there are different ways in which that cycle is interpreted, but anger tends to be one of the stages of grief. And when we are dealing with either feelings of anger or depression, when it's specific to grief, I think the way that we might deal with it would be different from just regular anger. And I don't think the idea of a boundary being crossed may be as relevant with the anger that comes with grief as it is with anger that we feel on a different basis. Ooh, there's a really interesting comment here about I thought I was sad, but the chart made me realize I'm feeling fear, and the gift is to protect myself. That's such a beautiful insight because often we tend to feel uncomfortable feelings that are less uncomfortable for us, in order to be able to not feel feelings that are more uncomfortable for us. I hope that makes sense. So, to give you an example, we might actually end up experiencing or choosing to allow more anxiety to come up when the actual feelings that we're not comfortable yet feeling, maybe guilt or shame or like anger, even. Like there may be feelings that cover up feelings within the difficult emotions range. Um, does self-doubt frequently bring up guilt? I don't know if there is a direct correlation for that. It might be interesting to look into for yourself if that's something that's coming up. Um, uh, Thank you, Kritika, for mentioning this helps analyze instead of avoiding emotions. I would also caution you from intellectualizing your emotions too much. That does tend to be an easier way to experience emotions, to think about them rather than feel them. But yes, definitely, I think the understanding is really important, especially with difficult emotions when they're taboo. Someone has asked how to stop invalidating your feelings. So that I think that is a question that we are going to check in on in a bit, about not necessarily how to stop invalidating, but rather how to actually validate. Okay, I think that's it for the
Niharika,
question. Yes.
there is someone who has also asked if emotions and feelings are different. Do you like to shed some light on that?
I think theoretically there may be certain differences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I do tend to use them interchangeably. Um, yeah, I'm not entirely sure how to answer that right now. Pranita, if you have any insights that you'd like to share about this distinction, I would also love to hear.
Okay, feelings could be probably any experience of maybe feeling nothing as well. Whereas emotions are something we can probably look at more theoretically or pinpoint towards.
Yeah, I
That's how
think
I
emotion,
understand it.
if I remember correctly from like high school psychology, I think emotions, the term itself also has to do with more biological responses.
Mm-hmm. Correct. So, looking at more in terms of what you can say more theoretically rather than just our experience. I think that would
Sure.
be
I would
something that.
encourage you, yeah, like I would encourage the audience to also look it up for themselves because I don't really know the answer for that one.
Not a problem. I think we'll move on with one more question,
Mhm.
or would you want to go ahead?
Um, I think we can take another question and then we can go ahead to the next part of it.
Okay. I will just. So someone has also. There are questions regarding self doubt. There are questions regarding guilt. Would you like to take them?
Right. So I think I already sort of covered that. Like, I don't know of a direct link between self doubt and guilt. Um,
Correct.
I'm just sitting with
I think
this.
we can move. Yeah, we can move ahead.
Sure, just give me a second. I'm just going to self doubt and guilt. I think the thing that happens, the link that I'm able to see right now, and maybe more research or checking in with your own journey would help you understand that better. But self-doubt is often something that comes from focusing a lot more on other people's responses rather than your own needs, and your
Mm-hmm.
own values and desires, and
Mm-hmm.
your own opinions as well. And I think when we're focusing so much on other people's opinions and other people's responses, it becomes a bit of a dance where sort of the other is taking a lead. Um, Whatever the other person does, we then change our responses towards that. That feels to me like something that comes along with self doubt. And that may frequently bring up guilt if we are feeling like a lot of worry about what others may think, how others are feeling about our choices, our actions. Yeah, that's about what I can say. There's one last question that I'd like to answer. Could there be guilt related to not being good enough? So, as I had mentioned earlier, the feeling of not enough, not good enough, or not like ambitious enough, or not like accomplished enough, or pretty enough, or rich enough, or disciplined enough, whatever that enough is, that would be associated with shame, not with guilt, because guilt is focused on actions.
Right, right, right.
Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead.
Yes, let's go ahead.
Pranita, do you have a question for me, or shall I just go to the next slide?
I think we can move to the next slide.
Okay, sure. So, in my opinion, healthy coping asks the question, what do I need to feel safe, secure, supported, whatever other need may be coming up for you right now, whether that's validated, reassured, loved,
Someone had
connected,
also asked motivated as well.
motive. What about motivated?
What do I need to feel like motivated right now?
What do I need to feel motivated right now? Yes, that could also definitely be like something. So, healthy coping to me is focused on responding to your needs, responding to your emotional need that is coming up. Um, and I don't think there is one right way to cope. I absolutely don't. I think we all respond, and like based on our own personal journeys, we've learned ways to cope with situations as we were children. And those responses also tend to become solidified as adults. I do think that coping strategies have an expiry date. I think like it's sort of like when you have an app that no wait, your phone is working just fine, and like there's a software update, and like you're like, oh, it's fine, like I don't need to do that right now. If anybody like me is out there who does this, doesn't automatically right away update their software, and then at some point when you go to an app with your current software and it says, oh, I only work on the next software, and then you have to sort of like upgrade your software. It's sort of like that. You have to sort of upgrade your own coping strategies as well, because they sometimes end up harming us rather than serving us, or serving our well-being or our growth. So for me, healthy coping definitely asks this question, like, how do I respond to this emotional need right now?
Correct, correct, correct.
Yeah.
So there is also a question from Sanskriti.
Mhm.
Just tell me your favorite advice, which you keep saying yourself, and that words really boost you when you are feeling unfixed from your experience.
I don't quite understand the feeling unfixed from your experience. Sans chat, it would be really great. Also, going back to the chat, I see somebody has mentioned guilt may lead to self doubt. That definitely feels like a possibility, especially if we're made to feel guilty about our own choices, about wanting certain things or having our own opinions, if we have been made to feel guilty by the people important to us, it would lead to self-doubt.
Right. Correct.
Sanskriti, I still don't quite understand what you mean by feeling unfixed from your experience. I'm not sure if that's a typo or if it's something that favorite advice I keep
Maybe.
saying to myself. Um, Honestly, it changes depending on what is coming up for me. Um,
Mhm.
well, actually, I guess I do have a reminder. I have a tattoo. It's of somebody giving themselves a hug. That sort of acts as my reminder very tangibly for self-compassion. And so it just helps me remind myself that it's okay to respond to my own emotional needs with kindness. And that's what I really find important and helpful. So, yeah, self compassion. Although I would say I don't always get that right, but it's a reminder. And I think that's what matters.
Right. Niharika, I noticed
Yes.
that you mentioned that everyone has their own way of dealing with these feelings that are difficult or unpleasant. So would you like to talk a little bit more about healthy coping strategies, and then um, come to maybe differentiating between what are there any bad strategies or any good strategies?
I think maybe let's check in with the audience also about this. Like, what do you all think? Do you feel like there is unhealthy or bad coping strategies? If we are saying that we
Yes,
find
please
ways
let
to
us know.
survive, yeah.
Correct.
So, like,
Yes, please let
okay.
us know in the comments over here also and on the YouTube as well.
So,
We're live on YouTube.
if you do think that there are unhealthy ways of coping or bad ways of coping, then please mention like what strategies you think are not that great to like cope. Netflix,
Yes.
substance abuse. I see smoking, displacement.
Displacement.
Yeah, so that would mean like taking
Correct.
feelings from about one person or situation and getting them out on another person or situations. Not letting yourself feel your emotions, napping, um,
Distraction.
distraction, avoiding self attacks. Yeah, eating, self blame, being harsh on yourself. Yeah, eating
We
disorder.
see a lot of eating.
Yeah, I don't know if eating disorder would sort of be here. If we are looking at it as a clinical condition, there's so many more layers to it than just a bad coping strategy. So I don't think I would really include that. Never confronting, so avoiding being harsh with yourself. Um, Emotional eating, I think, is what people are also touching upon here. Um, Distracting, avoiding the feelings, substance abuse, yeah. All of these, I definitely think. See, here's where I would sort of draw the distinction between healthy and unhealthy. I would sort of offer the question, is what I'm doing right now serving my long term mental and physical and emotional well being and social well being and all kinds of well being? While a lot of these strategies would sort of help mitigate the difficult feeling in the moment, if we're going to be consistently using only these things, it might end up being more harmful than helpful in the long run. I think one of the ways I also distinguish between healthy or unhealthy or unuseful coping strategies is whether they're also serving your growth. Are they supporting your growth? Um, all of the ones that you have mentioned, folks, like it feels like in the moment, they are an instantaneous reaction to the feeling that's coming up. But yes, definitely ask yourself this question: is this helping me in the long run? Is this supporting me in the long run the way that I want to be supported in the long run? So I would also include to this list of like unhealthy in the long run coping strategies, um, things like even increased caffeine use, just having a lot more coffee or tea than you usually would is something that might be what you're doing to cope with a difficult feeling or a situation. Also, isolating yourself. That is something that I think has become a lot more easier to do in the pandemic because all you have to do is not check your phone or like not respond to people. And that is an experience that already is difficult. Um, Isolating is not usually that helps in the long run in keeping you safe, secure, supported. Um, Also, self harm, causing injury to your body, that would be one of the ways that is definitely not serving your long term needs, but it may provide relief in the moment, but again, like at what cost it's sort of coming. So yeah, we are looking at instant gratification versus a long-term investment in yourself as the difference is what I would say between healthy and unhealthy coping strategies. Do you all agree with me? Do you have different thoughts? Like, please let us know.
Yes,
So
let us know in the comment section. We are also watching you on YouTube.
yes.
So please let us know in your comments.
um, I see somebody saying repression. So I would just like to make a distinction here between repression and suppression. From a very like psychotheory, psychoanalytic theory space, repression is an unconscious mechanism. So it's not something that we choose to do knowingly. It's something that just happens when the mind is not able to process or make space for something that feels very overwhelming or traumatic. So I wouldn't count that as a bad mechanism per se.
Right, so something that our body by default adapts to. You mean that?
I think more the mind than the body. Like when we not knowingly
Okay.
have actually blocked out certain experiences. That is what I would count as repression. And again, it's an unconscious process. It's not something that we think that, hey, I don't want to be remembering this, so I'm going to block it out. Um,
Right. Understood.
okay. I see a question here saying, is it useful to use unhealthy coping strategies in the moment if you don't have healthy coping strategies available? So, yes and no. Um, I would argue that there are always healthy coping strategies that are available. Is it something that you want to take up in the moment? Is what I would question. Having said that, sometimes we just need to avoid the problem. Sometimes we need to not feel the feeling. We need to not be overwhelmed, which brings me to an important point. Thank you for asking that question. So, we have what that's a bad drawing. We have what I would call three zones of safety. Give me 1 second. Okay. So there is the safe zone, there's the challenging zone, and then there's the overwhelmed zone. So often, when we're in the overwhelmed zone, what is most necessary is to do what we can to get back into the safe zone or at least into the challenging zone because we cannot. It becomes really hard to do sort of the right thing when we're feeling overwhelmed, when we're feeling under a lot of threat. So I would say use what strategies you need to survive in the moment, but definitely come back to also checking in, acknowledging that maybe this isn't something that I want to keep doing or something that's serving me in the long run. If you're overwhelmed by a certain feeling, for sure, go ahead, binge watch a show on Netflix. Is that something that you want to do every time you're confronted with this feeling? I would question you to check in on that. And yes, coping mechanisms do have expiry dates. So I would encourage you to keep updating the ways in which you are trying to cope with certain situations.
Right.
Okay.
So, okay. All right. So getting back to our ways of
Healthy coping.
how do you categorize? Yes. How do you
Yes.
categorize that then?
What is actually healthy coping? And we've talked about what's not. So let's take a look at what actually is. So these are some of the categories of coping strategies. Yeah. So just to recap, coping strategies are the ways in which we try to manage our feelings in the moment and in which we try to survive stressful situations. So all of the different strategies you all have mentioned, sorry, I couldn't help getting distracted by a question that I see. What would be a general expiration date for coping mechanism? I think that's very much subjective. Yeah, I don't think they come with like a use by date. I would say that it's expired when it's not doing the thing it used to anymore. And I would say that that is a point where you need to change up the way that you are coping with whatever feeling or situation is coming up. So there's self-soothing, again, going back to the body, going back to the nervous system. When we're feeling overwhelmed, the nervous system goes into like fight, flight, freeze. If we're experiencing a lot of things in the body, I very strongly believe that you can't have a relaxed mind in an anxious body. Self-soothing is one of the ways in which we sort of come back to a physical experience of equilibrium, is how we come back to a physical experience of not having the nervous system become like overly vigilant or like super activated. So I'm wondering if anybody has any ideas of what ways you can soothe yourself in. Also, just like a heads up, like self-soothing is a lot about engaging your senses. So taking a long bath, definitely. I might put meditation in mindfulness. Listening to music, yes, could be a part of self-soothing, could be a part of distracting, could be a part of emotional release. If you're feeling angry and you want to listen to some metal and sort of get it out there, I think it could serve different purposes. Um, There's long walks, gaming, cooking, masturbation. Well, I think that's a personal choice if that feels soothing. I think it can be a layered experience for a lot of people. So definitely check in on whether that's soothing for you. Talking to a friend, going out with friends, self pampering like shopping. I would put shopping as a distracting strategy because it's taking your focus away from the body, from the emotion, from whatever you're going through. Right. So I see that a lot of people actually have very good ideas of what healthy coping strategies could be like. Um, in case of extroverts talking to friends and family, thank you for that distinction. Although I do feel introverts also need that. I think it comes easier to extroverts, but introverts do need that connection as well. So I would encourage you, if you're an introvert, you're listening in, you're thinking of yourself in this, find a trusted person where you can talk to them about what's really going on. Self hugs, playing with kids, solving a 1,000-piece puzzle. I can't remember the last time I did that, but I definitely want to. Introverts do it with their one good
Right.
friend. Yes, I agree with you there. Petting
Right. While
animals.
we're going
Yeah.
through these coping strategies, Niharika,
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you think culture plays any role in these coping strategies in terms of what is healthy or what is right or what is wrong. You mentioned someone mentioned puzzle, someone mentioned speaking. So, do you think, in terms of these particularly strategies, would there be gray areas with respect to culture, and would culture be shaping these strategies?
I think culture definitely does play a role. Our culture does play a role in how we sort of cope with difficult feelings. Right in the start, I remember seeing a comment saying we're taught to sort of suppress or like not talk about these feelings. It's not something that we are brought up saying, hey, if you feel this feeling, talk to me about it. And I think gender also plays a really important role in how we cope. Like for people who identify as male, it may be seen as a lot more acceptable for aggression to be a way of coping as opposed to females or people who identify as women. Like it might not be as acceptable for them to show any kind of aggression as a way of coping. Similarly, I think culturally it's more okay for women to be feeling vulnerable or express emotional vulnerability, whereas for men, like weakness is not acceptable. So there may be responses like ladki jaisa kya ro raha hai, which is such a shutdown and which is such a hurtful thing to say for any gender. Like it's quite something that's painful to hear for me to even say right now. Vulnerability is absolutely not a weakness. And it is also an uncomfortable feeling. It's not something that we're taught to be okay with, but that is actually an uncomfortable feeling that I would invite you to develop a better relationship with. And I think a lot of coping and relearning how to cope, taking away from the ways in which culturally we have been taught is okay and not okay to cope, that is really an adult process. Like it's really a part of the personal journey of discovering and developing a different relationship with these difficult feelings. Culturally, yes, like denying our feelings is something that is more encouraged than accepting them, I feel.
Correct. We absolutely agree.
Mhm.
There could be some ways in terms of what would be considered right and what would be considered wrong, and our perceptions about those could come from our culture.
Absolutely. Come from our culture, come from, when we say culture, like I would say everything from our upbringing, like the immediate family, the extended family. Sometimes things are okay to do with the immediate family, but we're very like clearly said, bahar ke logo ke saath aisa mat karna. I would say
Right,
like,
even that too.
yeah, even that too. This whole thing of log kya kahenge plays a big part in how we cope, how we express ourselves and talk about difficult feelings. It would come, I would say, like our schooling plays a role in it. How we saw our peers dealing with difficult feelings, the media, really glorifying aggression or like saying that, yeah, like men don't have feelings or vulnerability is an undesirable thing. If we didn't have vulnerability, we wouldn't be able to take chances on ourselves or with other people. It's such an important experience. Yeah, also
Correct.
culturally, this I think we also live in a society that is full of giving unsolicited advice. And that
Yes.
unsolicited advice doesn't always tend to be very helpful. So if
Hmm.
even if like conversations were to open up about difficult feelings, responses might be like, sabere jaldi to ut ke dekho, go for a walk, get some sunlight and like eat your 3 meals a day, which are all really great things. But if just doing that is feeling difficult, that's not a helpful advice to have. Sharma ji ka beta.
Correct.
So yeah, we also live in a culture of comparison. um yeah.
Correct. I that also reminds me of something that should be culturally accepted. Or for example, any problem that you might have, there is one answer for it that okay, कि अच्छा थोड़ा सा एक्सरसाइज कर लो या in terms of थोड़ा
थोड़ा
कम
ये तो
खाया
करके
करो.
देखो, हाँ, थोड़ा
Yeah,
ये तो करके
correct.
देखो, सब ठीक हो जाएगा. But
Yeah,
it's
I
not
know.
the case. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the case. I mean, yeah, like you said, it it certainly points towards the role of culture in this.
And I think the
All
way
right.
that like we experience the message when someone says, "Thoda ye karke dekho, sab theek ho jayega," it's an invalidation of our feelings. It is sort
Correct.
of saying that don't talk about these things. And usually the unsolicited advice comes from a place of, I don't know how to respond to what you're saying, and it makes me feel uncomfortable or helpless to hear you feeling this way. And that's why
Right.
we go into like shutting down advice.
Right. Correct. Absolutely. Yes, there are many comments, and we are reading them in terms of relatable. And yeah, starts with Sharma Ji Ka Beta and ends with Sharma Ji Ka Beta. Correct.
And I think
Not to
like,
be sentimental and
and emotional.
emotional.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
And Shashank is also pointing out towards this one thing that um, who this advice comes from would also matter. So, for example, if there is someone, there is a relative that I might not feel very related to, or I might not look
close
up
to.
to,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
probably it wouldn't matter. But if it is coming from someone who is very close to me and someone who I look up to, then that might be something
That
that
has a
would
bigger
be
impact.
yeah, correct.
Mm. Yeah, I think almost I'm seeing like a lot of people here from the photos that I am able to see on your display. It seems like they are of a fairly younger generation, and somewhere it feels also like millennials or Gen Z. We are working on breaking these generational ideas around emotions and mental health and what it means to actually have feelings, feel your feelings, talk about your feelings. And when we're doing that, it inevitably comes in conflict with the previous generation's ideas. That friction is there, and that
Correct.
friction is sometimes really hurtful and really painful to just have. So I just want to acknowledge that for those of you who are trying to change these things with your families, like, don't give up. Um, if it's important to you, it's important to you.
Correct. Niharika, while we are talking about changing the dynamics and changing the norms and making it better for all of us, I heard that you are working on some products that were geared towards mental health and
I
improving our
am.
emotional experiences.
Yes, I
Would you
definitely
like to talk
am.
about them, please?
Yes, thank you. I'm very excited to talk about them. Um, I just want to say that before I do go there, there are questions that I'm sure we haven't been able to cover here. So I would also invite you to look at what those questions mean for you in your personal journeys, and access any kind of therapeutic spaces or any kind of practices that would support you in exploring these questions a little more for yourself. Um, yeah. So coming to my products, yeah, thank you so much, Pranita, for bringing this up. For the last couple of years, actually, I have been working on creating products that are, I have 3 points: evidence based, culturally relevant, and easy to use. I think like there's been a lot of products that I have come across from abroad, um, which are great, which I have found relatable to up to a point. And I noticed that there wasn't equivalents of those in India, equivalents of those which took into consideration the challenges of being in a South Asian culture, of um, having the kind of negotiations that as a South Asian we have to have on an everyday basis. Um, and so I am coming out with a range of mental health products, hopefully soon. It's been really delayed. And I'm just hoping that in the next month, I'm going to be able to put them out there. One of the products, which is what I'm going to be launching soon, is going to be around the theme of coping, and is going to be there to support you with different ways in which you can engage with healthy coping, in which you can give yourself these reminders of all of the things that are out there that you can do to support yourself in the long run, not just right now. And I am really hoping that a lot of people are able to benefit from these products. They are definitely there to be almost revolutionizing, I would like to say, if I may say so, how we see personal mental health care in India. As I said at the start, personal mental health care, like how we can take care of our own mental emotional health by ourselves, is not something that we have all been taught across the board. Growing up with families, if you have been taught it in school, if you have been modeled it with your families, have had these conversations with your families, kudos to you. I'm really happy that you got an opportunity to learn about this early on. But for, I think, a lot of us, it wasn't something that we even considered until maybe today, until we're growing up and facing these challenges, until 2020. So yeah, these products will be out there soon. If you're following me on Instagram at Interior Gardening India, you'll be able to see when they are announced and where you can purchase them. And yeah, hopefully we can stay connected with the content that I share there as well. I talk a lot about coping. I talk a lot about boundaries and relationship with the self, which is where I think coping also comes in. It is a defining part of your relationship with yourself as well. Yes, that's
Right.
about what I can offer right now without giving away too much about the products. I'm going to save
Okay,
it for
thank
the
you so
official
much. And I
announcement.
think I must say we are looking forward to those products and seeing how they are going to help us. We're really excited.
Thank you. Um, are we opening
Uh,
up a general Q&A now?
yes,
Or
yes, yes.
yes?
We are opening up with questions for next few minutes. There's a question about how to deal with breakup of a serious relationship.
Um, that's a very large question. And that would be, yeah, that would be a large question to answer, but I'm going to try and put it down in brief. I think after the breakup of any serious relationship, it's important to take some time to look at how this relationship impacted you, to
Mm-hmm.
look at what feelings you're left with at the end of the relationship. And there is a process of grief at the end of a serious relationship or of any relationship, I feel. As you go through the process of grief, just giving yourself some time and space to explore what it means for you to be single, what it means for you to be unattached to somebody in a relationship, in a partnership, and yeah, get a better idea of who you are now. So focusing on personal growth is something I would encourage, and giving yourself time. Experiencing the grief is important. How much you want to experience is entirely up to you. I also see a thing about validating emotions, which we had missed out talking about. But yeah, this is just a brief for everybody. I think when we're
Okay.
saying validating emotions, there's two important components. One is naming the emotion, which we tried out earlier, and one is allowing for the emotion to be there. So, not trying to get rid of it, but saying, I acknowledge you. And if we go back to the statement, a part of me feels confused right now, a part of me feels disappointed right now, a part of me feels very hurt right now. And that's okay. So, giving yourself a little
Mhm.
bit of room to feel those feelings, and you decide how much room that is, you decide how much room you can give to that feeling, uh, is an important part of validating our own feelings. And if you have been in a pattern of invalidating your feelings, this is sort of changing that dynamic within yourself. So, getting curious about your feelings as we have today, trying to name the emotion as again we've tried today, acknowledging that the feeling is there, feelings like people don't like to be ignored. Um, And again, remembering that the feelings are transient, they are not there to stay permanently. Some may stay for longer than others, but that doesn't mean it's never going to go away. Especially when we're feeling overwhelmed, I think that's a really important reminder that this feeling is not the end of the world. It's not how the rest of your life is going to be. And also, that you're not the only person to have ever experienced this feeling. Even if you're feeling lonely, even if you're feeling like there is nothing that could make this better, it's very unlikely that you are the first and only person to have ever experienced it. So do remind yourself of that too, because suffering becomes easier when we know that we're not the only ones doing it. We're not the only ones going through it. Remember that, yeah. So using internal and external resources, so whether that is self-soothing, whether that's sort of engaging in some mindfulness, in some grounding meditation, in art, in movement, with music, whether it's sitting back and watching a movie that you liked as a child, or whether it's reaching out, connecting with somebody, even offering your support to somebody in a way that feels possible to you, can help you manage these difficult feelings a little easier. And when possible, do spend time getting a deeper understanding of your own feelings. Release, rinse, and repeat, I would say.
Correct, correct, correct. Before we come to the next set of questions, I would just like to request all the participants to fill out the feedback form that is shared in the chat box. Your feedbacks are valuable for us, and they'll help us improve this experience for both you and us. So please send us the feedbacks through the Google form. Also, for the participants who want the certificates, we'll be sharing a Google form for the certificate. It's already there in your chat box. So just check the link and fill the Google form without fail, because you will only receive the certificate if you fill the Google form. All right.
I think that's it for me, Pranita.
Okay. Just
I
one second.
think that's also the end of at least the Zoom questions. If there's anything on the YouTube comments, do let me know.
Yes. Do we have any questions? Yes. Can you send the links again? We will send the links again. Um,
I think Sumiti
Let me
is
just.
doing that.
Yes, yes, yes. Let me do it. Apart from that, do we have any other questions, guys? Till then, as we move towards the end of the webinar, we would also want to talk about our program called Empathy Ambassadors Program. Through this program, we want to take conversations that are about difficult topics. All right. So the program aims to empower young individuals to break stigmas and initiate conversations around the most pressing issues of our times, like mental health, abuse, body image issues, and much more. So, as a part of the program, we conduct support group meetings every week. So, we not only want to share information and educate the people about these issues, but also provide peer to peer support. And we do that through our support group meetings. So, to be part of the support group, our WhatsApp link is also there. The link is there in the chat box. So feel free to be part of this WhatsApp group to contribute something, to seek support in both the roles. So we would be happy to have you over there.
Pranita, I was wondering if you could also share like what the support groups are like. Like, is it a peer support group? Is like what kind of conversations happen there, or is it facilitated by a trained professional? Like, how does it happen?
Definitely, definitely. I would like to talk a bit more about that. So our support groups, they are basically based on the entire idea of empathy, that understanding the human experiences of the other person and how and what they have gone through all this. All right. So these support groups have a specified theme about that, and where like there could be some theme probably about therapy or probably about experiences of extreme experiences of dealing with difficult family situations or experiences of dealing uh, with feelings of confusion with respect to your gender orientation or confusion between love versus friendship. So there could be one particular theme to that, and we have facilitators who moderate these conversations. So we are not only educating the people regarding the terminology and technicalities of these issues, but we are also hearing out the lived experiences from the people are who are willing to share it, so that we are collectively also supporting each other, but also talking about these things.
That's really wonderful
Right?
to hear. I'm so glad to hear of your
Yes.
initiative because like we need exactly that, more empathy ambassadors in the world. I think the world could use a lot more
Yes, we need
compassion.
that amount of social support.
I think somebody is unmuted.
Yes, yes, yes. So in terms of when we are also talking, like, thank you for asking this question. It makes me share so much about these empathy ambassadors program. There are also trained people, since they also receive training with respect to moderating the conversations with empathy and more compassion, right?
Would you want me to take this question, Pranita and Niharika?
Sure.
Yeah, I can just
Sure,
tell
sure, sure. Definitely go ahead.
a little bit about. So basically, yeah. So can you hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
We can help you. Go ahead,
Okay.
sure.
So yeah. So basically, Empathy Ambassadors programs an initiative of Humans of Safe Places, as part of which we are empowering young college-going individuals to take important conversations like mental health issues, body image issues, uh, sexual abuse, and many more issues like that forward in amongst their peers in college campuses, as we know that they're extremely rampant in 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 our society and specifically in colleges. So we provide them training. So we provide them compassionate training and training with, so that they can be better listeners. Um, Training as to unlearning and learning training. So it's like we are providing them a set of trainings and workshops that will enable them to be better in conducting these support groups. So those trained individuals conduct these meetings for us, and they conduct
Right.
it amongst their peers in their in their campuses and amongst their classmates, and they, also take this conversation forward. So this webinar is also a part of the program in a way, because we not only want to just talk about these issues, we also want to educate about these issues. So because talking is just not enough, like, it's because there's always a sense of shame and stigma that is associated with these issues. So talking is one important aspect, but educating or creating awareness is as important. So so individuals who are attending this session can also take this conversation forward by first attending this webinar. They have, as Niharika conducted this wonderful session, so they have talked about these and understood emotions, and now they have been, they will be, they can, through those group to group sessions, they can seek peer to peer support or emotional support, as we call it. And yeah, that's it. Just you can take on from your Pranita.
Thank you, Shaurya. Thank you so much for shedding light in detail about this. I'm sure we all have learned a lot about the format and the features of these empathy ambassadors program. With that, we come to the end of this webinar. Are there any final round of questions?
I think I'd like to thank everybody for showing up for yourselves here today. And I'm hoping that the information that I have shared helps you be more conscious of the ways in which you cope, be more conscious about your relationship with your own feelings, and figure out ways in managing them that work for you, and that work for not just your present self, but also for your future self.
Correct. And we would like to thank everyone who joined over here and made this webinar for such a fun over and made this webinar so much interactive. Your questions, your comments, your feedback, your thoughts, all of it that you shared in your comments added to the value of this webinar. So we first of all thank all the participants who joined in with such a huge number, but not only in huge number, but also in terms of qualitatively uh, added value to this webinar. Apart from that, we thank you, Niharika, for joining in today and shedding the light on the topics that are particularly difficult to talk about and definitely difficult to experience. I'm sure a lot of us have learned a lot about coping, and we would introspect more about that. So thank you so much for connecting with us about that. We would also like to thank the Humans of Safe Places IT team for moderating uh, the Zoom session and YouTube session, and also the entire HOSP team. Thank you so much. Thank you.